Francois Truffaut's French New Wave classic Jules and Jim centres on a love triangle between two best friends and a woman they both love. Each of them, Jules, Jim and Catherine, are carefree youthful spirits full of playfulness, with Jules and Jim offering mutual respect and love. But this joyfulness gradually develops into tragedy as they are pushed to maturity through war, family life and relationship troubles. Roger Ebert, in his review of Francois Truffaut's films, states that their tragedy is that they shared a magical youth and that adulthood will not and cannot accommodate it. No practical arrangement of their lives can duplicate the freedom of their early days in Paris. The men can try to come to terms with this, but Catherine cannot, and Jules and Jim is really Catherine's film. Roger Ebert's review is discussing how the film details the beauty of carefree youth and how, as the characters grow, their carefree lifestyle is forced to change when responsibilities grow. The film is influential and significant in its depiction of the complexities of a love triangle, the foundation of said triangle being between two best friends. Jules, an Austrian, and Jim, a Frenchman, are playful personalities who do everything together, going to the gym, having massages, visiting the local bars, activities not dissimilar to the present-day best friends. Upon meeting Catherine, alongside two other women, Jules encourages they dispose of formal titles such as Sir and Miss and greet by the touching of toes and feet, a playful greeting that emphasises the youthful spontaneity. Jules and Jim clearly both feel a connection to Catherine, and upon meeting her at her apartment, Jules says to Jim in a friendly tone something of a suggestion to not include Catherine in his growing number of sexual endeavours. Jules, caring for Catherine, and knowing that Jim has a reputation for being intimate with numerous women, but also keeping in mind his respect for his best friend, offers a friendly warning, a warning that indicates that Jules believes Catherine is someone special. Catherine is almost the epitome of spontaneity. A moustache on her face, she walks with Jules and Jim around town, even convincing a passerby asking for a light to his cigarette that Catherine could be a man. They plan to race across a nearby bridge only for Catherine to cheat and win. Catherine is quite unpredictable, but seemingly offers a similar playful nature to that of Jules and Jim. It's easy to see why these two young men with their cheeky personalities would feel connected to Catherine, a woman who seems to reflect them both. As the trio run to home by the coastline, playing a game that searches for traces of civilization on their walk towards a beach, making a fun way to find litter. Jules asks if Jim would be okay if Jules were to ask for Catherine's hand in marriage. Jules understands that they both share the same feelings for Catherine, but Jules also respects his best friend's insight and perspective. Although Catherine doesn't initially agree to the marriage proposal, Jules suggests he will propose to her every year on her birthday, romanticising this gesture. Exaggerating Catherine's spontaneity is a scene where, as the trio walk back from a play, Jules and Jim debating over it, Catherine, out of frustration, asks why Jim doesn't protest more often towards Jules before jumping in the river. She has attempted to divide the two with an extreme gesture. As war breaks out, this is a major turning point for Jules and Jim, as they are both enlisted in opposing armies. As Jules suggested to Jim over the telephone that he and Catherine plan to marry in his home country of Austria, he has clearly been made to enlist over there. During the war, Jules writes a letter to Catherine about how he misses her, but how he also wishes not to fight Jim in battle. He openly writes about his love for Catherine, but within the subtext of the scene we understand he must love his friend Jim just as much, wishing no harm upon him. On the other side of the war, Jim shares this sentiment of not wishing to fight Jules in battle. Their friendship transcends war, but unfortunately their personalities are not quite the same as they used to be pre-war. After the war, Jules and Jim write to each other, Jim coming to visit Jules at his new home in the countryside. Jules is married to Catherine and they have a daughter called Sabine. Jules congratulates Jim on winning the war, but Jim retorts that he would much rather have the family life that Jules has. Jim is envious as his feelings for Catherine haven't diminished, but this idyllic family life is only idyllic on the surface. Jules admits to Jim that Catherine has had numerous affairs, possibly in an attempt to keep the carefree nature adventure of her youth, but instead of showing frustration, Jules has come to terms with it, accepting he is likely not the man for Catherine. Jim, still having his affections for Catherine, is later granted permission by Jules that if he wishes to marry her, he can. This marital tension is illustrated during a conversation between Jim and Jules, which is interrupted by Catherine, frustrated and argumentative about the different types of French wines. Despite their young carefree loves of yesteryear, it's clear that Catherine and Jules' relationship is in a difficult place, and with Jules' sense of respect for Jim, if his wife is to settle down with anyone else, he would clearly rather it be a best friend of his. The affair between Catherine and Jim only works for a short while. They spent an intimate night together and the next day is full of laughter and games, but Jim grows jealous when Jules and Catherine play together in the bedroom above his. Returning to Paris, Jim reconnects with an earlier girlfriend of his, Gilbert. She is supportive and gives the impression of maturity over spontaneity. Establishing this reconnection gives Jim the opportunity to reconsider his relationship with Catherine. Should he be with a woman so spontaneous, or should he keep his connection with a more mature woman? As Jim returns back to Jules' home, Catherine and Jim attempt to try for a baby, an attempt to develop the family life he was so envious of earlier in the film. Their attempts are not successful, which places tension on their relationship. Jim returns back to Paris and writes to Catherine that he is in disbelief about her pregnancy. The unfortunate happens. Catherine has a miscarriage. Jim, back in Paris, is met by Jules and they greet each other enthusiastically, old friends with nothing to hide. Their playful banter is still apparent when Jim teases Jules on his choice of hat, suggesting he can't be seen in Paris with a hat like that, offering Jules one of Jim's own hats. Jules admits that after the miscarriage, Catherine had not been quite the same, suffering from depression, a shadow that looms over the trio's relationship. When Jim tells Jules he wishes to marry Gilbert, Jules admires him. He even suggests Jim to be a smarter man than himself for realizing when things are over with Catherine. Catherine doesn't accept the news so easily, pulling a gun on Jim and threatening him. Months later, the trio reconnect, Jules seeing Jim a few rows ahead at the cinema. Jim, reluctant to talk to Catherine, is lured into her car where she drives both of them off of a bridge, killing them both. Jules is left alone attending their cremation. The narrator compares Jules and Jim's bond to that of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza from Cervantes' brilliant novel Don Quixote. The chaotic goal is to balance their friendship alongside a stable relationship with Catherine. This suggested comparison to Don Quixote implies the narrator's understanding that this goal, while admirable, was always unobtainable, transforming this initially carefree, playful, beautiful friendship and blooming romance into a devastating tragedy. In conclusion, Francois Truffaut's Jules and Jim is a masterful work that demonstrates youthful wonder between a trio of friends which develops into a complex love triangle. And while at first the carefree and bohemian demeanours live on, eventually as adult life pressures the characters to accept responsibilities and to grow, preserving these same carefree attitudes becomes increasingly difficult. Catherine, Jules and Jim are not bad people, but their friendships transform into something tragic, as time expects them to move on and mature rather than preserve their youthful endeavours.